Welcome to another video from ExplainingComputers.com and to this end of year channel update. Across 2018 we've had all kinds of things here on Explaining Computers, ranging from future brain interfaces to operating systems to robots, retro hardware and of course single board computers. Yesterday I also received this, the UK Book of YouTube 2018, and if we turn to page 20, there we are inside. I'm in there with the channel as one of what YouTube describe as the UK YouTube creators who are redefining the future of video content. And of course it's very nice to finish 2018 with this kind of recognition from YouTube itself. And that I think is therefore a great time for us to look ahead at what's coming up on the channel in 2019. Now, one of my big plans for early 2019 is to do a PC build, a build with a Ryzen CPU, because many of you said, Chris, do a build with a Ryzen CPU. And in fact, I've not done a build on this channel for amazingly 2 years. I can't believe that we're due for a build again. So I'm going to build a budget PC using a Ryzen processor, and the build will be partially about doing the build and partially about giving an opportunity to talk about current computing technologies and how they're put together and all that type of stuff. So I expect this series will start in mid to late January, and there'll be a video about putting together and choosing before putting together the processor and the motherboard and the RAM and the cooler and doing all that. And that'll be followed immediately the week after by a video on the selecting and the putting together the case and the power supply and sticking the motherboard in and the SSD and making all the thing work. So there'll be 2 videos to start it off. And then there'll probably be a gap of a week where we do something else like a single board computer, and I'll come back again and we'll have a video on setting up a new PC. Something many of you have asked about, so how you actually get hold of Windows and license it and how I would set up Windows, and we'll probably look at Linux and things like that there as well in setting up the PC. And then there'll be another little gap, come back a week after that and maybe do a video on putting a graphics card in the system. I want to start out with a budget build using onboard graphics, which can be quite good in some of the latest Ryzen processors, and that'll make a video there. And then there'll be another video 2 weeks after that, probably looking at something like doing LED lighting. I know some of you really like LED lighting in PCs, some of you hate it, but it's part of PCs now, so I'd like to do a video on that on the channel. It seems like a very visual topic. So that'll be 5 videos coming up, say in mid to late January and February 2019. And the only problem I have with that is that, as you may know, AMD are going to be making an announcement at CES in January, on the 9th of January to be exact, about the next generation of Ryzen processors, the Ryzen 3000 processors. And I'm holding off to see exactly when to buy the components for my build. I bought the memory so far, there we are. Got the memory. You're saying, Chris, that's some red Corsair Vengeance memory. Did we see that recently in your video on RAM? You did. I've got the memory, nothing else yet for the Ryzen PC. But if AMD announce in January they're going to be doing the new Ryzen 3000 processors and releasing them within a few weeks and we can get hold of them, I'll clearly wait and I'll do the build based upon the Ryzen 3000 processors, in which case this series will get delayed a little bit, if you see what I mean. But if they don't, and it's going to be, as I think it will, April-ish, we get the new processors, and I'll say, well, things are always moving on, and I'll build with a current generation Ryzen chip. Anyway, that'll be coming up. I would be interested to know your views on the build. So my plan at the moment is to use a Ryzen 3 to do a budget build, starting with onboard graphics, adding a graphics card, building it up, and I hope that'll be an interesting thing to cover here on the channel. Now, it's hardly a surprise that I'll be making videos about single board computers in 2019. Across 2018, I made 22 videos about single board computers. 12 were about more project focused things, cooling, things like that, but there were 10 videos about new boards, or at least boards new to this channel. And so we had videos about the ROC 64, about the Tinkerboard S, about the Raspberry Pi 3B Plus, about the Odroid HC1 and HC2 board you can use to build a NAS or a small server. We looked at the ROC Pro 64, the NanoPi M4, the Latte Panda Alpha, the NanoPi Neo 4, the Raspberry Pi 3 Model A+, and finally the Cardass Vim 2 Max. So that was a lot of new boards in 2018. And I plan to look at slightly fewer new boards in 2019. And that'll sure be terrible news for all the manufacturers that are constantly trying to send me new boards. But I really want to be a bit more selective and look particularly at some of the lower cost boards. I want to look at more project-based videos with single board computers, focusing on things like Internet of Things in 2019. Many of you keep saying, do more videos on what you can do with a single board computer. And I think that's a good piece of advice. I'm going to take that on board in 2019. That said, there will be some new boards, and there's two particularly I'm looking forward to. One is the Odroid H2, which is an x86-based single board computer from Hardkernel. I was going to be looking at the Odroid H2 back in December 2018, the 2nd of December it was booked in, but the board was very successful on first launch, and there is unfortunately a shortage globally of the Intel chips, the Gemini Lake chips they use on that board, and therefore they came to me in December and said, well, we were going to give you a review sample in December, but they've all sold out, and it's better if you made a video when the board is available again, and that will be February, March 2019. So February, March, I'm crossing my fingers to look at the Odroid H2. I think it'll be a very, very exciting single board computer, x86 based, and it's also got 2 Ethernet ports, lots of possibilities with that board. The other board coming along, also x86 based, is the Udo Bolt. And again, I was hoping to look at that in December 2018. It's been delayed a little bit because of firmware issues with reading drives in Linux, but it should be available in January. So again, I hope to look January or February 2019 at the, fingers crossed, the Udo Bolt. So if there's a new board coming along, you've heard about it, I hope to have heard about it as well, but please keep telling me about boards. If you hear about them, make comments about them, and we'll bring them to the channel. So there we are. Single board computers will be back, more project focused. And I think there is this, sometimes people say, well, single board computers, they aren't really about computing and you should focus more on the desktop stuff. I think single board computers point the way ahead. Desktops are getting smaller. The line is going to blur between traditional desktops and the smaller single board models. And also, single board computers allow us to experiment with computers. And someone said to me in a comment a few weeks ago, they said, single board computers rekindle my interest in the hobby of computing. And I can totally get that. And that is really why I will continue to cover single board computers on this channel. So, how else do I plan to keep this channel fed with content in 2019? Well, as always, I've got various Google Docs documents. How do we live without Google Docs? Which remind me of what I might be doing coming up in the following months and years. Sometimes videos hang around in these documents for ages. The explaining RAM video I did recently was actually in a document with plans for almost 3 years before it got made, but hopefully most videos will come out before that. Anyway, it says down here, more retro computing. It seems people like looking at old computers and old computer parts, including me, so I'm going to try and find ways to make that happen on the channel going ahead. There will also, at the other end of the spectrum, be a video called The Future of a Desktop PC. I'm working on that. And I also want to go back to AI. I did some videos on AI in 2017. They didn't get a lot of views, which I was rather surprised at, because I think AI is very much part of the future of computing. So, for example, I'm planning a video for next year, for 2019, called Explaining TensorFlow, about that AI framework. I also want to talk about some of those broader developing computing issues, things like quantum computing I'll return to, Internet of Things, things like that. I might come back to programming. It says here, maybe make a return to programming. It's tricky. I did one programming video on Python in 2018, lots of very positive comment on that, not that many views. And the problem is to cover programming at a level of realistic depth, it would take lots of videos that would detract from other things on the channel. Not sure that's a good idea. Lots of other people make programming videos on YouTube. I will come back to free software and operating systems. As I said already, there'll always be software stuff on the channel. I will do robotics again. I'll continue with my Devastator robot build. And I might turn to things like Arduino, looking at microcontrollers, not sure. Some of you have asked for that. Might take us too much off topic, but I'll think about that. There'll definitely be videos looking at what some of you call the big core explaining computers topics. This year I did, in 2018, I did explaining RAM, explaining PCIe slots, things like that. There'll be videos like that, certainly on those core computing things next year. Almost certainly I'm going to be doing explaining CPUs video sometime in 2019. And also there's a couple of special projects still hanging around in these documents. One is a video on explaining digital cinema. I think I've mentioned that in about 5 or 6 of these update videos. I really must make that video at some point. Lots of planning's gone on, really must make that happen. And I've also got a special animation project planned, which I've been thinking about for a while. I won't tell you too much about that yet, it's going to be a surprise for you. But I was down at a YouTube event down at Google and Google Academy in London a couple of weeks ago, and an idea formed in my head as part of that process, and therefore that animation project may arrive maybe by about the middle of 2019. So there we are. Lots of things are coming up. They've got to be. They're all captured in my Google Docs here for Explaining Computers. So here we are at the end of another year of Explaining Computers videos. I can't believe how rapidly 2018 has flown by, but it has. And so all that remains is for me and Mr. Scissors to raise an Explaining Computers mug to wish you the best of health and happiness in 2019. Thanks for watching the channel in 2018. I hope you continue to enjoy it in the future. But now that's it for 2018, and I hope to talk to you again very soon.